Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, let's go back to the old-time infections. Avian tuberculosis is something that most of us have probably forgotten about, but it did not disappear. And backyard farms can be the source of infection at poultry farms, because avian tuberculosis affects not just hens but also cattle and pigs. Avian tuberculosis outbreaks are still registered in backyard farms in Russia as opposed to industrial poultry farms. At poultry farms, the growing period is limited, while tuberculosis is a disease that takes time to develop. And if we want to extend the layer productivity period, then this biological hazard might be still relevant for the breeder flocks. And that leads us to two questions. Should humans be afraid of avian tuberculosis? Is it dangerous for humans? Mycobacterium avium caused some infections in humans. And for instance, the first avian tuberculosis in the US was registered back in 1947. And the answer to the question is yes, this disease is dangerous for humans. The mycobacteria provokes much interest just because of the hazards for humans. And there are several serotypes of the avian tuberculosis which are dangerous for humans. And usually it results in lung pathologies in humans, and that can lead to severe types of immunodeficits. And that is especially true for HIV positive patients. This slide shows the disseminated disease caused by the avian tuberculosis infection in an HIV positive patient. Not just lungs, but the entire skin is affected. Mycobacterium avium coloration is shown in the slide. In addition to that, there are examples of patients with disseminated infections caused by Mycobacterium avium without any impact on the lungs. So what I'm saying is that these forgotten infection might cause problems not just in the European parts of Russia, but in Europe in general. We have lots of HIV patients, and for instance, in the Novosibirsk region, the number of HIV patients is higher than anywhere else in Russia. The HIV patients can be infected with secondary infections transmitted by wild birds, and the same holds true for AIDS patients. Mycobacterium avium can cause diseases in humans that can result in difficulties in treating. This is true for kids as well. In terms of prevention, PPEs, personal protective equipment, is the first thing to use for preventing avian tuberculosis. Another widespread question is whether you can eat meat and eggs from poultry infected with tuberculosis. The answer is no. You have to scrap the poultry meat, and the carcass cannot just be thrown into garbage. Carcass of such poultry should be burned. All types of birds are susceptible to tuberculosis. That is true for both domestic and wild birds. Chicken and turkey are the most susceptible types to tuberculosis. The main sources of infection are infected birds, water, feed, and equipment. Mechanically, it could be transmitted by mice and rats that populate the farm. The infection is done as aerosol or indigenously. Bacteria can be swallowed by birds with feed or sand, but mucosa can also be infected if it is scratched. Tuberculosis considerably reduces the resistance resistance to other infections. Pigeons and sparrows can infect the feed and the hen houses at farms. Tuberculosis can be transmitted via eggs as well. The incubation period is within 2 weeks to 12 months. The feed intake goes down, the egg production rates go down as well. Initial signs might disappear, and that might cause well, that might be misled by the fact, and they might not even suspect that this is avian tuberculosis, but it's there. And at a certain time, it will reappear as a second outbreak. Poultry start losing weight, egg production rates go down, and usually it results in high mortality. Weaker, the infected birds have a higher fatigue. Their average daily gains go down. The breast weight reduces considerably. Of course, at poultry farms, we never see consequences like that, but this is something which might be seen at backyard farms. Those who breed decorative chicks might just think that the feed intake went down. The feathers are dirty and are rare in such birds. Their body temperature might be normal, but severe forms of exhaustion result in a high sensitivity, and you can hardly touch hands like that. Extreme hypertrophy of liver is yet another sign. You can see it at the autopsy. This particular slide shows the autopsy of a liver of a bird infected with a high high highly viral avian tuberculosis. These are the hemorrhage spots that could be seen there. Highly virulent progression results in hepatosplenomegaly, and small nodes might appear. You have 1 minute left, so please go to the slide with your takeaways. This is what I've been talking about. You might not see such telltale signs, but such an image might lead you to suspicions that it might be avian tuberculosis. Nodal changes in the spleen, myocardial hypertrophy. These are the consequences of avian tuberculosis. Oftentimes, tuberculosis does not result in any pathological changes in the lungs, but you might see this in a highly viral tuberculosis cases. As for the diagnosis of the tuberculosis, we use tuberculin on layers, and a decree approved in 2020 reads that such assays should be done on hens over 2 years of age. And if you see edema after the inoculation, that is considered to be a positive result. Samples might be sent to a lab to properly diagnose the disease with the help of a PCR test. You have differentiated from leukemia, avian leukemia, the Mark's disease, and aspergillosis. Aspergillosis primarily affects the lungs, while tuberculosis and its signs is something that I have covered in my previous slides. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Given the fact that the growing period increases, we will, and that will probably be true not just for layers, but for parent flocks, tuberculosis might become a problem. As far as I know, none of the farms do PCR tests for tuberculosis right now. Leukemia is something that we discussed yesterday, and you just mentioned in your last slide that differential diagnosis should be done to differentiate tuberculosis from leukemia. Based on my experience, I can tell you that in the past year, we saw 2 cases of antigen carriers of leukemia. This is something that Nikolai mentioned. So antigen levels, both in serum and the yolk, were high, and we diagnosed tuberculosis ultimately. Well, you might diagnose leukemia and stop at that. But this is a slowly progressing infection. Such nodes will appear only after a very long time. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If the mycobacteria circulates in a farm, you just never see signs like this. And let me add to that, if I may. histologically, they can also be discerned, and you can use histology tests to discern and differentiate between the two diseases.
Поэтому да, встречается, и я был удивлен несколько.
This is something that we do come across. Can I ask another question? Go ahead, just one last comment, and then we're going to have to move on. Thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, do you have any data on the outbreak of this disease among the staff? Any statistics on the humans infected at such forms? The comment is off the mic.
Обычно проходят ежегодные обследования.
Well, usually we do annual tests for tuberculosis amongst our staff. Well, just your standard medical checkup, which is done at all the forums.